In the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game, it's pretty hard to get everyone to agree on the same thing. After all, we're completely different people with different ideas, ambitions, point of views, etc, etc. Seriously, the next time you're at locals, go ask people which competitive card most needs to be banned, or maybe what archetype the next structure deck should be based on. See how many different answers you get. But if there's one thing in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that appears to be universally disliked, it is forbidden card erratas. Players do not like them. Heck, I'll even throw my 2 cents in here and give them the Cap G stamp of disapproval. And for the most part, it's easy to see why. Konami almost always goes overboard and completely ruins an often iconic and revered card. Just look at the difference in reactions between banned cards finally getting released.
Let's move on down. Change of heart is legal.
Straddles! Straddle! Straddle! Straddles! Straddles! Guys, I'm crying!
Misk, Skullcrabat, Striker Dragon Star.
No! 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 No!
And then compare those to cards being unbanned because they've been errated.
Firewall Dragon's back, let's go. DeLorean, nobody cares.
All this actually led me to an idea for a new series, where I'll cover some of the most egregious and worst erratas in Yu-Gi-Oh history. In these videos, I'll give a quick history lesson on the card itself, its impact on the competitive meta during its glory days, why said card was banned, and ultimately, and unfortunately, its dreadful return via the errated version of the card. Without further ado, welcome to the worst erratas in Yu-Gi-Oh history. In this video, we're going to tackle Goyo Guardian. Let's hike back to 2008 and the very beginning of the 5Ds era. Goyo Guardian launched with a bang as it debuted in both Ultimate and Ultra Rare out of the Duelist Genesis Core Booster set on September 2nd for the TCG. As the set's name implies, this was a new beginning for players and ushered in the era of powerful synchro monsters. While the set was full of iconic ones like Red Dragon Archfiend and of course the cover card, Stardust Dragon, players soon realized that Goyo Guardian's insanely high stats, combined with its brute force ability, made it arguably the most powerful synchro monster in the entire set. Goyo was a fairly simple, meat and potatoes, full-on battering ram type of card. This thing started with offense, ended with offense, and had offense crammed in the middle. It was a level 6 Earth generic synchro monster with a ridiculously high 2800 attack and 2000 defense. Goyo's effect would let it immediately summon any monster it destroyed in battle and sent to the graveyard in defense mode. While of course an absolutely amazing effect that was very powerful by 2008 standards, it actually wasn't unique at all. Most may not remember, but Konami had pretty much tried this type of monster to a T with Ghost Knight of Jackal just 4 years prior. Sporting far worse and less practical stats for a monster that needed to destroy things in battle, Ghost Knight of Jackal actually had an effect identical to Goyo Guardian. Unlike Goyo Guardian, however, Ghost Knight was a complete dud from a competitive standpoint. One clear distinction here that let Goyo shine like a diamond was its attack power relative to its peers. When you have to kill a monster in battle to trigger your one and only effect, attack value of course is going to be incredibly important. The Jackal was a mere 1700 attack, which not only was bad on face value as it was lower than the standard 1800 attack for a level 4, but made even worse when you took into consideration that it was a 1 tribute monster. Compare that to Goyo Guardian, who had an absolutely absurd 2800 attack. This of course could not only run over most competitive boss monsters in the game, but was well beyond any other level 6 synchro in Yu-Gi-Oh! Oddly enough, that statement is actually still true 14 years later to this day. That's right, Goyo Guardian's attack value was made so obscenely high that Konami never dared attempt to top it. This was quite obviously where most of Goyo Guardian's power and threat came from. Forget about this card outmuscling other level 6s. Goyo punched so far above its weight, it could, and throughout Teledad format would, easily run over level 8 synchro monsters like Stardust Dragon and Thought Ruler Archfiend. Once Goyo pummeled a monster, its effect would trigger and the real trouble would start. Now the opposing duelist was in a position where they'd have to take down their own monster for fear of it being turned completely against them just a turn later. They'd also have to do it with preferably a monster stronger than Goyo Guardian itself, lest he just run over their newly summoned card and steal that too. Keep in mind that duelists would also have to fend against their own monster's effects, like Stardust Dragon's protection effect, which could be used to counter some of their own cards, like Heavy Storm or Crush Card Virus, both heavy hitters and blowout cards during Teledad format. This is why Goyo Guardian instantly rose to being seen as the best synchro monster in the game at that time. While it didn't offer the protection for your cards like Stardust Dragon or the potential self-revival of Colossal Fighter, what it did offer was punishment of your opponent that was flat out unrivaled. Having your monster be run over in battle had been a thing since the beginning of this game, but now all of a sudden that monster wasn't just dead and gone, but yet re-summoned and soon to be turned against you. As mentioned earlier, if said monster was something like Stardust Dragon, Elemental Hero Stratos, or Lila, the Lightsworn Sorceress, then your opponent would probably be getting a bonus effect as icing on the cake in addition. Goyo Guardian's effect on Teledad formats was actually very similar to Hydrogeddon a year prior in the metagame of 2007, a monster with a battle focus effect so potent that letting it trigger even a single time usually led to one player being in an overwhelmingly advantageous position where their offense could inherently grow without expending additional resources. During the very early days of Teledad, players would just summon Stardust Dragon, and not always backed by a protective trap like Mirror Force. This actually wasn't a bad strategy against Gladiator Beast, as they often struggled to attack over 2500 and up monsters. But as they learned of Goyo's devastating impact to snowball games after stealing those Stardust Dragons, this play became far less popular. There was one specific matchup, however, where Goyo Guardian's talents weren't able to be used to their fullest potential, and that was against Gladiator Beasts themselves, which would remain around tier 2-ish for the next couple of formats. In this matchup, Goyo summoning the destroyed monster in defense mode was actually a liability due to Glads only needing to battle for their tag out effects to be unlocked. If you ran over a Laquari, for instance, and opted to steal it, you would be giving your opponent an easy way to run over something, then tag into Murmillo and kill the Goyo Guardian itself. So not taking the monster was actually the better play, as you would remove that option completely. As the Teledad format came to its natural conclusion, one thing was evident. Goyo Guardian was simply too powerful of a card for players to have access to multiple copies of. And yes, at this time, it was standard for most Teledad decks to run 2 or 3 copies of the card. See Shonen Jump San Francisco of January 2009, won by Mexican national champion Alejandro Reyes Suarez, who maxed out on it. This led to the card rightfully being limited on the March 2009 ban list. Don't be fooled, however. Goyo Guardian was still a powerhouse, even at 1, and spent the entire 2009 year being completely unrivaled and unmatched when it came to level 6 synchro monsters. Sure, there were other solid level 6s released during that time, like Blackwing, Armed Wing, but they were either theme specific or flat out not in Goyo's league. This wouldn't change until the Duel Terminal 1 and the release of Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barrier in late January 2010. Brionac was the first legitimate challenger to Goyo's throne. Like everything else, it really couldn't match its raw damage or attack power, but Brionac had utility for days. Its bounce effect served as spell, trap, and monster removal, was not a once per turn effect, could manipulate the graveyard for Judgment Dragon and Dark Arm plays, and actually had some disgusting loops with an equipped spell or two. This was far more prevalent in the OCG's metagame thanks to Premature Burial Rescue Cat plays and their version of Synchro Cat. After a full year and a half, Goyo had been slightly edged out by another level 6 generic synchro monster, but he was still considered to be a competitive staple. After all, this card still hit like an absolute truck, and in situations where you needed maximum damage or the opportunity arose to steal a monster, he was your guy. Combine this with the proficiency of making level 6s in decks like Blackwings and Synchro Cat due to Blackwing Blizzard and Rescue Cat plays, and his role in the metagame was still cemented. In fact, Goyo would remain in this position right up until the card's banning on the March 2011 Forbidden and Limited list. The Goyo Guardian ban pretty much split the community. Just look at some of the responses from the official March 2011 ban list thread on Pojo, which, side note, was viewed a whopping 85,000 times. On one side, players claimed that the card was still too good and had too high of an attack for its completely generic summoning requirements. On the other hand, duelists argued that the banning of Goyo Guardian before Brionac specifically was laughable, as it was the stronger card, and that Goyo wasn't quite the force it was when it first premiered. Some even had wild conspiracy theories that would say Konami didn't want Goyo to remain legal, as it would be a bad look to have one of its first synchro monsters being significantly stronger than the first batch of its C monsters, which were right around the corner. While this was just a crazy, unproven conspiracy theory made up by the players, it actually would have been true had Goyo Guardian not been banned at this time. My personal opinion was that Goyo Guardian's banning would have made sense had they done it anytime following Teledad format right up until the March 2010 ban list, which would have been their first opportunity post the release of Brionac. Those were the true peak days of the monster. By the time Konami did ban Goyo, it was still an amazing card, yes, don't get me wrong, but the metagame had shifted towards 6 Samurai, Plants, Gravekeepers, etc. The card wasn't nearly as popular or problematic during that time. Goyo spent over 4 years banned, but was finally put back to limited status in the TCG on the July 2014 ban list. Players were pleasantly surprised by the move, as the once dominant level 6 Synchro monster had all but evaporated from the top tier metagame ranks. Brionac was now banned at this time as well, and there really wasn't a card holding the torch for level 6 Synchro monsters. Yugioh was now fully entrenched in the Zexal era, and Synchro-based strategies hadn't had a lot of competitive success during those years. Goyo was an excellent callback to the days of Synchro dominance, but predictably, the card saw almost no competitive play. To that end, Goyo Guardian was moved to semi-limited status just 6 months later on the January 2015 ban list, which was to be expected. Usually when cards are on this trajectory, it means that they're way past their prime and aren't really a threat to be problematic or meta-dominant anymore and will slowly move to unlimited status. This appeared to be the case, but the strange thing was the card actually remained banned in the OCG. It was a telltale and clear sign that OCG Konami or R&D was clearly still afraid of the card's power, for some unexplained reason. I say unexplained because in my opinion, the TCG was a fairly good indicator that the card wouldn't do much if unbanned. Ban list differences between OCG and TCG are fairly common, so most didn't think much of the situation. That was until the January 2017 OCG limit regulation list was revealed and the OCG finally decided to return the card. However, it inexplicably came with an errata. Goyo Guardian had the same stats and effects, but now required an Earth Tuner to summon, which made the card painfully difficult to bring out. Most players like myself were beyond confused as to why a card that had been legal in the TCG for 2.5 years, mind you, suddenly needed an errata to return to the OCG. This is just my personal opinion, but it was honestly maddening, as if the OCG was saying that they knew better despite the TCG literally testing the safety of Goyo's return to the game for years. Konami and the TCG would announce 2 months later that Goyo Guardian would be receiving the same errata in the TCG to make the card more in line with the Arc V anime counterpart, which honestly, even that explanation didn't hold much weight. There are hundreds of cards that work completely differently depending on which version of the card you use, anime versus physical card game. Why make such a big move for Goyo Guardian specifically? I rarely, if ever, want to accuse anyone of lying, but this seemed like a straight up lie. If Konami cared that much about anime accuracy, why did Goyo Guardian spend so much longer banned in the OCG? And why was it only unbanned when they announced the errata? The likeliest answer was that OCG Konami was still afraid of the card for some reason and would only unban it with the errata. Some claim that the Earth Tuner requirement put it more in line with the new Goyo themed monsters used by the Domino City security forces in the Arc V anime. But even that didn't make a lot of sense, as prior to the errata, only the fusion-based Goyo Emperor specifically required an Earth Tuner. So if this move was done in the name of continuity, it actually had the opposite effect. Many players detest this errata because it was 100% unequivocally unnecessary. This is the one time we actually know that for a fact, because the card was oddly unbanned prior to its errata and didn't do anything competitively. The fact that it appears that OCG Konami may have forced this errata for an illegitimate or at the very least unnecessary reason makes the matter even worse. Now, as you all know, the once great Goyo Guardian is nothing more than a shell of its former self. I guess the one solace is that the card is still a superstar in Edison format duels. And with that, we are at the conclusion to this Yu-Gi-Oh story. If you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, you learned something, give the video a big thumbs up. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Check out the other stories that I'm sure are on your screen right now, and thank you for watching as always.